Former top Beijing official speaks out against Occupy Central. Petro Poroshenko sworn in as Ukraine's president. And marking the 70th anniversary of D-Day.
Good evening. The former director of the Xinhua news agency in Hong Kong said foreign and domestic anti-China forces are driving the Occupy Central movement. Zhou Nan said Beijing must intervene if these forces try and turn Hong Kong into a base against Chinese communist rule. But an Occupy Central leader insists they don't plan to pose a challenge to Beijing. This year marks the 30th anniversary of the signing of the Sino-British Joint Declaration, the document that established Hong Kong's return to China as a special administrative region. Zhou Nan, a key figure in the negotiations, who also served as the head of the Xinhua news agency in Hong Kong before the handover, said anti-China forces here and overseas are behind Occupy Central. He called the civil disobedience movement an illegal act, a plot by these forces to usurp the power of the Hong Kong government. Zhou hoped young people won't get fooled into taking part, accusing the movement's supporters of manipulating the impulsiveness of youngsters. He also said Beijing cannot allow Hong Kong to become a base against Chinese communist rule under the banner of democracy. If this were to happen, the central government must intervene, he said. He said Beijing has the right to use the People's Liberation Army and impose curfews in the SAR if riots break out. Zhou also said Basic Law Article 23 national security legislation must be enacted to prevent Hong Kong from becoming a base of subversion. Pro-democracy lawmakers accused him of threatening the city.
And it's actually a very crude piece of insult on Hong Kong people's wish to fight for true democracy.
I believe that in this sense, the human rights, the justice and democracy are very foreign to the PRC. But I hope all these elements, all this universal virtue will very soon be domestic.
Ho added that most Hong Kong people are peace-loving and urged participants of pro-democracy events in general to keep their emotions in check to try to boost their cause. Occupy Central organizer Benny Tai said Zhou is mistaken. We have no desire to challenge Chinese sovereignty, he said. Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs Raymond Tam declined to respond to Zhou's comments, saying he was not speaking in any official capacity. Tam did say universal suffrage is a sensitive and complex matter that will be hard to reach a consensus.
Well, there are calls for tighter security at the Legislative Council building after dozens of protesters broke through security cordons and clashed with security and police there last night. They're against a development plan for the Northeast New Territories. Jean de Silva reports.
Chaotic scenes at LegCo last night as the Finance Committee discussed a $340 million funding proposal for the development plan. Protesters made their presence felt inside the building. After things quickly got out of hand, LegCo's Secretariat staff notified police. A number of people were injured in the chaos. Today, some legislators called on the LegCo Secretariat to beef up security and accused staff of allowing protesters to get inside the building in the first place. Priscilla Leung said that if existing security arrangements fail to allow LegCo members to go about their business safely, then those arrangements are seriously flawed. Other legislators disagreed.
Because this is the Legislative Council building and the public security force, the police force shouldn't have been involved. But then they said, one, they could seek assistance from the police, and two, they could, or they needed, because they didn't have enough personnel last night. They only had about 20-something officers around.
We are quite short of manpower to deal with really the conflicting situation, so that there might be a need in certain cases that we need to call the police for help, but it should only be on the call and on the request of our Secretariat that the police force should enter our Legislative Council premise to enforce law and order.
João da Silva, TVB News.
Turning overseas now, 48-year-old billionaire candy tycoon Petro Poroshenko has been sworn in as Ukraine's president. He assumes leadership of a country mired in a violent uprising and staggering economic troubles. James Aitken reports.
With Western support and the hopes of a desperate, divided nation riding on his leadership, Petro Poroshenko took the oath of office today. Poroshenko was elected on May 25th, 3 months after his pro-Moscow predecessor, Viktor Yanukovych, was ousted and fled to Russia. He won nearly 55% of the vote in a field of 21 candidates. He's also the first Ukrainian presidential candidate since 1991 to win support from both the Ukrainian-speaking West and the pro-Russian-speaking East. Poroshenko's business empire started through importing cocoa beans and now includes shipbuilding and one of the country's most influential TV stations. He's estimated to be worth $1.6 billion. Poroshenko faces an immediate crisis in relations with Russia. Pro-Russian separatists believed to have Moscow's support have turned parts of eastern Ukraine into a war zone. Western governments will be watching for clues on how he intends to handle the insurgency. Poroshenko said that Ukraine will not give up Crimea, the Black Sea peninsula that Russia annexed in March. Crimea was, is, and will be Ukrainian, Poroshenko said after his swearing in. He was given a standing ovation. But Poroshenko has said that it's important to mend ties with Russia quickly. After a brief meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Paris yesterday, he said detailed talks on a ceasefire between government forces and separatists could begin within a few days. The two countries are also at odds over the pricing of Russian gas, with Moscow threatening to cut off supplies unless Ukraine settles its debt. Poroshenko inherits a country on the verge of bankruptcy and hopes to soon sign the economic part of an association agreement with the European Union. That is a first step towards full membership. James Aitken, TVB News.
It was a day of remembrance, honor and pride for veterans who attended the ceremonies in Normandy, marking the 70th anniversary of D-Day yesterday. As Alan Buckner reports, it was also a day of diplomacy for a Europe not completely at peace.
French President François Hollande presided over the ceremony on Sword Beach, one of 5 areas where Allied troops landed to begin their push towards German-occupied Paris. For the assault, the Allies mustered more than 150,000 British, American, and Canadian troops. At least 4,400 Allied soldiers were killed the first day. More than 20 world leaders and monarchs took part in the ceremony. Hollande thanked the veterans in attendance, now in their 80s and 90s.
It was very touching for me, very touching. We lost one of our pilots here, belonging to 835 Squadron. A Sea Hurricane was shot down on Sword Beach, and he was a personal friend of mine.
And all the people that were waving to me, you know, and shaking my hand and that, and I felt like a blooming film star.
Both symbolism and pragmatism were on the French president's agenda. After his exclusion from G7 talks a day earlier, Russian President Vladimir Putin was invited by several world leaders for face-to-face meetings to try to ease the tense situation in eastern Ukraine. U.S. President Barack Obama and Putin held an unscheduled informal meeting prior to the ceremony. But some pointed out the real guest of honor was Queen Elizabeth, the only world leader there who had actually participated in World War II. She enlisted in the British military as a 19-year-old. In another location, a British Lancaster bomber and 2 Spitfires did a flypast over Arromanches Beach. This year's D-Day ceremony is expected to be the last major commemoration for most of the aging veterans. Alan Buckner, TVB News.
US President Barack Obama is insisting disclosures made by whistleblower Edward Snowden have damaged American interests. In an interview with NBC News, Obama also defended a deal with the Taliban to secure the release of a US soldier in Afghanistan.
On the subject of Bo Bergdahl, there is real confusion, and we're hoping you can clear up this one point that arose last night and today. What was the reason for not informing the 8 members of Congress who would customarily be informed by this?
Brian, I have to tell you the same thing that I've been saying for the last several days, which is we have a rule, a principle, that when somebody wears our country's uniform and they're in a war theater and they're captured, we're going to do everything we can to bring them home. And we saw an opportunity and we took it. And I make no apologies for it.
The reason for the lack of congressional communication?
As I said before, the main concern was that we had to act fast in a delicate situation that required no publicity.
In our interview recently with Edward Snowden in Russia, I raised the allegation, the charge that he has badly damaged his country. How has the United States been harmed by what he did?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the particulars of the case. I will say that the disclosures that we've seen had a very significant impact on our intelligence operations around the world, had a grave impact on a number of our diplomatic relationships, compromised our ability to gain insight into some of the work that our adversaries do. I've said before, and I'll say again, there's no doubt that this is an area of legitimate debate. And I think there are patriots on both sides who recognize, on the one hand, we've got to make sure that our eyes and ears are open for potential threats. What's also true is we've got to make sure not only that our privacy is protected, but that the manner in which our intelligence services operate internationally comports with our values and our ideals.
And still ahead in the news tonight. Canadian gunman charged over deadly cop shooting. A warning about sports gambling ahead of the World Cup. And Primary 1 allocation results announced.
我時時都 upgrade 自己嘅，連部冷氣機都要 upgrade， 所以我裝嘅係冷暖空調機。而家夏天熱成咁，冬天又凍冰冰，有咗佢，屋企先至係最舒服嘅地方。我最中意留喺屋企，裝冷氣梗係裝冷暖空調機啦。一個家冬暖夏涼最重要。
Panasonic。香港儲物室帶俾你一個環境舒適、設備更完善嘅精品級迷你倉，俾你更自在嘅儲物空間，珍惜擁有。以專業及真誠嘅心服務顧客，不斷創新改進，滿足你嘅需要。你嘅生活儲物夥伴，香港儲物室精品級迷你倉特設升級隨你搬服務，令你儲物更輕鬆。
Welcome back to TVB News. A man suspected of gunning down 3 Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers and wounding 2 others has been formally charged. 24-year-old Justin Bourque was arrested after a 30-hour manhunt that shut down the city of Moncton. In a brief court appearance yesterday, Bourque showed little emotion as he was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. Prosecutors and the defence agreed that